A four-star general walked straight across an active flight line, past a dozen saluting officers who outranked almost everyone else on that base, just to reach a young woman standing alone by the gate. And the first word out of his mouth was her rank, not her name. "Tonight, let me tell you what happened at Ashcroft Airbase on a Tuesday morning nobody there will forget, and how the woman a group of officers laughed at for looking lost ended up being the reason that entire base changed how it welcomes strangers. Stay with me on this one, because the ending hits harder than you'd expect. And if it does, go ahead and hit subscribe now, because there's always another flight worth telling." Major Simone Faulkner arrived at Ashcroft Air Base just after 8 in the morning, stepping off a transport shuttle in a plain travel uniform with no visible rank insignia on her jacket, a single duffel bag over one shoulder, and a laptop case in the other hand. She was 29 years old, and in a career spent almost entirely inside classified programs where visibility was a liability rather than an asset, she'd grown used to arriving places looking like exactly nobody in particular, a skill she'd cultivated as deliberately as any tactical discipline she'd ever trained for. The base itself hummed with its usual morning activity. Transports taxiing toward hangars, ground crews moving equipment across the tarmac, the ordinary rhythm of a working airbase that paid her arrival no particular attention. She checked the gate signage against a small card in her hand and began walking toward the operations building with the same unhurried, purposeful stride that had carried her through 4 years of assignments most people at Ashcroft would never be cleared to hear about. A cluster of junior officers near the gate, waiting on their own transport, watched her cross the tarmac and exchanged glances among themselves. One of them, a first lieutenant named Casey Boyd, nudged the officer beside him and laughed under his breath, not quite quiet enough. "New civilian contractor, probably," Casey said. "Looks like she took a wrong turn out of the terminal. Somebody should point her back toward visitor processing before she wanders onto the flight line." A couple of the others chuckled, one of them glancing over just long enough to confirm the joke before turning back to their own conversation. Simone heard it clearly, the sound carrying easily across the open tarmac in the quiet morning air, the way certain comments always seem to find their target, no matter the distance. She didn't turn toward them. She adjusted the strap of her duffel bag, checked the gate signage against the small card in her hand, and continued walking with the same unhurried, purposeful stride she'd carried off the transport. No visible reaction crossing her face at all. What Casey Boyd and the cluster of junior officers near the gate didn't know was that Major Simone Faulkner had spent the last 4 years assigned to a classified Joint Operations Planning Cell, one of the youngest officers in the program's history to be entrusted with lead planning authority on missions most of the people on that base would never be cleared to hear a single detail about. She wasn't a contractor who'd taken a wrong turn. She'd been personally requested for a temporary assignment at Ashcroft by name, and she was walking toward the base operations building because that was exactly where she was supposed to be. She'd earned her way into that program the hard way, finishing near the top of every course she'd ever taken, building a reputation among a small circle of senior officers for a kind of quiet, exacting precision that made her one of the most trusted planners in a field where trust took years to build and seconds to lose. None of that showed up in her posture crossing a tarmac with a duffel bag, and she'd stopped expecting it to a long time ago, the same way she'd stopped needing anyone's assumption to catch up with the truth before she was ready to let it. Simone reached the base operations building and checked in with the front desk, presenting her orders and identification to a young airman who processed her arrival with polite efficiency, entirely unaware of anything unusual about the paperwork in front of him beyond a temporary assignment code he didn't have clearance to fully understand. The kind of routine processing that happened dozens of times a day without anyone thinking twice about it. She was directed to a waiting area near the operations floor to wait for her assigned liaison, and it was there, seated quietly with her laptop case at her feet, that Casey Boyd and 2 of his fellow officers happened to pass through again, having finished their own business at the operations desk. "Still finding your way around?" Casey asked, not unkindly exactly. more with the easy condescension of someone who'd already decided what kind of person he was talking to and hadn't bothered to update the assessment. Visitor badges are actually issued 2 doors down if that's what you're waiting on. I'm exactly where I need to be, Simone said simply, no edge in her voice at all, just plain, unbothered fact. Casey shrugged, clearly unconvinced, and moved on with his colleagues, the exchange forgotten by him almost as quickly as it had happened. Simone returned her attention to her laptop, reviewing briefing notes for the assignment that had brought her to Ashcroft in the first place. A joint exercise planning session that would require exactly the kind of precision she'd built her entire career around, her focus narrowing entirely onto the work in front of her. 20 minutes later, the operations floor shifted, a ripple of sudden activity and straightened postures moving through the room the way it does whenever senior leadership arrives unannounced. General Harlan Reyes, a 4-star officer overseeing the entire regional command, walked through the operations building with 2 aides trailing behind him, his presence commanding immediate attention from every officer in the room, salutes rising on instinct as he passed. He didn't stop to return most of them individually. He scanned the room with the brisk efficiency of a man with a tight schedule, and his eyes landed on the waiting area near the far wall, where Simone sat quietly with her laptop. General Reyes crossed the operations floor directly, his aides struggling slightly to keep pace, moving past several colonels and majors who straightened instinctively as he passed, without breaking stride for any of them. He stopped in front of Simone's chair, and she rose immediately, coming to attention with the same crisp precision that 4 years of exacting work had carved permanently into her muscle memory. "Major Faulkner," General Reyes said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent operations floor, extending a hand rather than waiting for a formal salute exchange. "Thank you for making the trip on short notice. I know this assignment came together fast." "Happy to be here, sir," Simone said, shaking his hand, her composure entirely unshaken by the sudden and very public attention now fixed on her. "Your planning work on the Meridian exercise last spring is exactly why I wanted you specifically for this," the general continued. "I've read the after-action report twice. I don't say that about many of them, Major. Your sequencing on the contingency branch alone saved my planning staff a full week of rework." The operations floor had gone almost entirely still, officers throughout the room quietly absorbing the fact that a 4-star general had just crossed an active operations floor to personally thank, by name and rank, the young woman several of them had walked past without a second glance less than an hour earlier. Casey Boyd stood frozen near the far side of the room, his earlier casual dismissal replaying itself somewhere behind his now very pale expression, the weight of it settling in with each passing second of silence. "I'll let you get settled," General Reyes said, "but I wanted to be the one to welcome you personally. Your liaison will brief you on the exercise parameters within the hour." He offered a final nod and turned to continue toward his own meeting, his aides falling back into step behind him, the operations floor slowly exhaling back into its normal rhythm, though something in the room had shifted permanently in the space of those 90 seconds, a recalibration nobody present would forget anytime soon. Casey approached her hesitantly once the general had left the building, his earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by something closer to visible mortification. "Major, I'm sorry. Earlier at the gate, and again just now, I had no idea." Simone studied him for a moment, no anger in her expression, just the same steady patience she'd carried through the entire morning. "You made a quick assumption," she said. "People do that when they're not really looking closely at who's actually in front of them. I'd just ask you to look a little longer next time." "I will," Casey said, and meant it, his voice noticeably smaller than it had been at the gate that morning. "For what it's worth, ma'am, I really am sorry." "Apology accepted," Simone said. "Now, if you don't mind, I have a briefing to prepare for." She didn't dwell on the exchange any longer than that, didn't require a longer explanation or a more elaborate show of contrition, simply returned to her laptop and resumed the work that had brought her to Ashcroft in the first place, the moment already receding behind her, the way most of these moments eventually did. Word of the exchange moved through the base quickly over the following days, the story reaching officers who hadn't even been present for the original comment at the gate, though Simone herself never brought it up again, treating the entire episode with the same unbothered composure she'd carried from the very first laugh that morning. Several of the younger officers who heard the story secondhand found themselves, in the weeks that followed, pausing just a beat longer before making assumptions about the next unfamiliar face crossing their own tarmac. The joint exercise Simone had been brought in to plan ran successfully 3 weeks later, her precision and thoroughness earning quiet, genuine respect from officers across the base, including several who had never crossed paths with her before that Tuesday morning at the gate. Casey Boyd, assigned briefly to her planning team during the exercise's final phase, worked under her direction without a trace of the earlier condescension, listening closely to every instruction she gave and taking careful notes on decisions he might once have questioned out of reflex rather than genuine disagreement. I spoke with Major Faulkner sometime after that exercise concluded, and I asked her what stayed with her most from that morning at the gate. She said it wasn't the laugh, and it wasn't the general crossing the operations floor to shake her hand. It was the 20 minutes in between, sitting quietly with her laptop, doing her job exactly the way she would have done it regardless of who was watching, because her work had never actually depended on whether Casey Boyd believed she belonged there. She told me something else, too, something a mentor had told her early in her career, back when she was the youngest officer in nearly every room she walked into. He'd told her that the people who laugh fastest rarely stick around long enough to see how the story actually ends, and that the only opinion that ever really mattered belonged to the people who'd already seen her work up close, whether or not the crowd at the gate had caught up yet. At 35,000 feet, or standing quietly in a waiting area at 8 in the morning, it's never about how lost you look walking in. It's about whether the work speaks for itself once someone finally bothers to ask. Now here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who never bothered to actually find out who you were, only to be proven wrong later? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one, and some of the best stories on this channel started exactly there. I'm Captain Marcus Brooks. Thanks for flying with me tonight. If this story moved you, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll see you on the next flight.